I heard the knock before I even saw her. Sharp, precise, angry. The kind of knock that didn't ask for permission. It demanded attention. When I opened the door, there she stood, Karen. Clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed, lips pursed so tightly I wondered if she even had teeth. "Did you know," she began, voice dripping with the smug satisfaction of someone about to ruin your day, "that your mailbox is exactly 1 inch taller than the HOA regulations allow?" I blinked. "You measured my mailbox?" She gasped, as if I had just accused her of something ridiculous. "Of course I did. It's my duty to protect the integrity of this neighborhood." And just like that, I knew. This was war. The neighborhood was supposed to be peaceful. A quiet cul-de-sac where kids played on their bikes, neighbors waved politely, and the biggest drama should have been whose turn it was to host the next block party. That's what I thought when I bought my house. I was wrong. Enter Karen. Not just any Karen. The Karen. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, the enforcer of unwritten rules, the wielder of a clipboard so powerful it could bring even the most stubborn homeowner to their knees. Her mission in life? To preserve the integrity of the community, which apparently meant harassing homeowners over the most ridiculous infractions imaginable. The first time she knocked on my door, I thought there was an emergency. Maybe a gas leak or a lost pet. Nope. She wanted to inform me that my mailbox, yes, my perfectly functional standard-issue mailbox, was, and I quote, visually disruptive to the uniformity of the street. I blinked. It's the same as every other mailbox. Karen pursed her lips, her short, aggressively blonde bob bouncing slightly as she stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was about to reveal classified information. But it leans ever so slightly to the left. I stared at my mailbox. It didn't lean. At least, not enough for a sane person to care. "Okay," I said, unsure what else to say. She beamed, assuming my compliance. "Wonderful. Please have that corrected by Friday." And with that, she spun on her heel and marched off, probably to hand out another citation for a crime just as heinous, like a porch light that was too warm of a white. I should have realized then and there that this was just the beginning. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe Karen was just one of those people who had too much time on their hands. Maybe she just really, really loved HOAs. I figured if I kept my head down, I could avoid her wrath. I was wrong, because the moment Karen decided you were a problem, you were a problem. And she would not rest until you were either completely under her thumb or had packed up and left town. The next violation notice came a week later. This time, it was for excessive foliage encroaching upon the public sidewalk. Translation: a single leaf had fallen from my tree onto my driveway. One leaf. And that was just the beginning. The violation notices kept coming. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Maybe a hazing ritual for new homeowners. But no, Karen was deadly serious. One morning, I stepped outside to find yet another letter taped to my front door. This one, printed on official HOA letterhead, declared that my garbage cans were visible from the street for longer than the allowed time frame. I glanced at the driveway. The bins were still in their designated spot, neatly lined up next to my garage. I had rolled them out for pickup the night before and brought them back in as soon as I got home. But apparently, according to the Gospel of Karen, the mere act of existing in plain sight for more than 30 minutes post-collection was a grave offense. I sighed, crumpled the notice, and tossed it into the very trash bin that had been deemed unacceptable. That was when I saw her, standing at the end of the sidewalk, arms folded, lips pursed, clipboard in hand. The HOA Karen stance. I met her gaze. She raised a single eyebrow, like a villain in a low-budget soap opera. "Is there a problem?" I asked, bracing myself. She inhaled sharply, the way someone might before delivering bad news, as if she were a doctor about to tell me my house had been diagnosed with an incurable case of noncompliance. "You must bring your bins inside immediately after collection," she said, enunciating each word as if speaking to a particularly slow child. I gestured toward my house. "They're already inside." She narrowed her eyes. They were out past the allowed time. I stared at her. "By how long?" Karen pulled out a small notepad and flipped through her scribbled notes. "Approximately 17 minutes. 17 minutes. I rubbed my temples. "You, Karen, do you just sit outside timing my trash cans?" Her lips curled in satisfaction. "It's my duty to maintain the integrity of our community." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was being ridiculous, but I had the sneaking suspicion she would have stood there all day, lecturing me on the dangers of improper bin etiquette. So, I I forced a tight-lipped smile, nodded, and shut the door in her face. That should have been the end of it. But Karen was just getting started. Over the next few weeks, she became a one-woman surveillance operation. No infraction was too small for her watchful eye. A garden hose left uncoiled for more than an hour? Citation. A lawn gnome that dared to exist? Violation. One day, I caught her outside, standing on the sidewalk, staring at my front yard with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. I stepped outside. Now what? She pointed an accusatory finger at my grass. This is over 3 inches tall. I stared at my lawn. It looked fine. Normal. Perfectly cut, even. Did you bring a ruler? I asked. Karen pulled a small tape measure from her pocket and held it up triumphantly. HOA regulations state grass must be maintained at 2.5 inches. I let out a slow exhale. You're actually measuring my lawn? She didn't even blink. The rules exist for a reason. At that moment, I realized that Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was on a power trip. A self-proclaimed sheriff of suburban justice, patrolling the neighborhood in search of the next unsuspecting homeowner to terrorize. And for some reason, I was her favorite target. At first, I tried to take the high road. I really did. I figured if I just followed the rules, at least the real ones, Karen would get bored and move on to harass someone else. But Karen wasn't wired that way. She thrived on control, on nitpicking every tiny detail, on finding problems that didn't even exist just so she could feel important. So, I decided to have a little fun. The next time she left a violation notice, I read it carefully. This one was about my front door. Apparently, the color was not in harmony with the community aesthetic. Never mind the fact that it was the same shade of deep navy that had been there since I bought the house. Karen had spoken. The door was unacceptable. I could have argued. I could have gone to the HOA board and fought her on it. Instead, I grabbed a can of bright neon green paint and went to work. The next morning, Karen nearly broke her own speed record power walking up my driveway. She didn't knock. She banged. The moment I opened the door, she gasped, eyes locked onto the offensively vibrant color behind me. "What is this?" she shrieked, as if I had just committed a felony in broad daylight. I leaned against the frame. Oh, the navy wasn't in harmony with the neighborhood, so I picked something cheerful. She sputtered. You know this isn't allowed." I pulled the HOA rulebook from my pocket, flipping to the section on approved colors. Huh. It says here that as long as it's a pre-approved color from the HOA palette, it's fine. I looked up innocently. And this Karen is on the list. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought she might crack a molar. No one actually picks that color. I shrugged. Guess I do. She stormed off, muttering something about an emergency HOA meeting. After that, I started responding to her absurdity with equal absurdity. When she complained that my Halloween decorations were too intimidating, I replaced them with life-sized cutouts of her. One on my lawn, one by the mailbox, one right outside my front door. She called the HOA board immediately. They told her there was nothing in the rulebook about life-sized Karen decor. When she cited me for unapproved lawn ornaments, a single garden gnome that my neighbor had gifted me, I went out and bought 20 more, lining them up along my front walkway like an army preparing for battle. Karen lost it. She started camping out in her driveway with a notepad, taking detailed notes on my daily activities. If my car was parked at an angle she didn't like, I'd find a notice in my mailbox. If I left a package on my porch for more than a few hours, another violation letter would appear. I knew she was escalating, but at this point, it had turned into a game. And the more ridiculous she got, the more I enjoyed pushing her buttons. But then, she did something that took things too far. Something that made it clear she wasn't just being annoying. She was on a mission. And that's when I decided it was time to fight back. It turned out I wasn't the only one who had been dealing with Karen's reign of terror. The moment I started fighting back, my neighbors began coming out of the woodwork, whispering their own HOA horror stories like survivors swapping war stories after a long battle. Tom from next door caught me one afternoon while I was setting up my latest round of approved but infuriating decorations. This time, a row of completely regulation-friendly flamingos, because I knew Karen would hate them. "She once accused my cat of trespassing," he said in hushed tones. I blinked. "Your cat?" He nodded solemnly. Said he was loitering on her lawn. Filed an official HOA complaint. Had to prove he was an indoor cat. Then there was Lisa, 2 houses down. She tried to fine me for using off-brand mulch. Off-brand mulch. Lisa crossed her arms. said it didn't match the community standard mulch. I checked. There is no community standard mulch. Another neighbor, Raj, chimed in. She made me repark my car 4 times in my own driveway because she said the angle wasn't aesthetically pleasing from the street. Slowly but surely, I started realizing that Karen had made enemies everywhere. And now that she was so laser-focused on making my life miserable, the rest of the neighborhood had decided to turn it into a spectator sport. One evening, I caught Karen measuring my grass again, this time with an actual ruler. Tom peeked over the fence and whispered, "What's the verdict? Are you in violation?" I sighed dramatically. The grass is just under regulation height, but I don't know, Tom. It might have intentions of growing taller. He gasped. How dare you let your lawn have aspirations? Lisa snickered. Be careful, she might call the HOA tribunal. The more Karen fumed, the more the neighborhood rallied behind me. One day, she stormed up to my porch, arms flailing, ranting about a violation. Before I could respond, Mrs. Anderson, an elderly woman who had lived here for 20 years, leaned out her window and called, Karen dear, why don't you ever smile? Karen turned red. Maybe if you got a hobby, Raj added helpfully. Do you crochet? Karen spun on her heel and marched away. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with a petty HOA tyrant. This was war, and the whole neighborhood was ready to pick a side. Karen was losing control, and she knew it. For the first time in what was probably years, the neighborhood wasn't afraid of her anymore. The violation notices? Ignored. The passive-aggressive emails? Deleted. The constant HOA complaints? Laughed at. And nothing, infuriated Karen more than realizing she no longer had the power to make people cower. So, like any true HOA tyrant in decline, she did what any rational person would do. She doubled down. One morning, I woke up to find a brand new complaint taped to my front door. This one wasn't just a violation notice. It was a full-fledged legal-looking letter, complete with excessive bolded text, multiple exclamation points, and an unnecessary number of legal-sounding words that Karen had clearly copied from Google. The offense: excessive and unlawful decorative displays designed to cause visual disharmony and unrest within the community. Translation: my flamingos were bothering her. By this point, I had had enough. So instead of taking the notice down, I grabbed a bigger piece of paper, wrote "Approved by HOA Guidelines" in giant, bold letters, and taped it right below her complaint. Then, just for good measure, I added a few more flamingos. Karen lost her mind. She started pacing in front of my house like a general plotting an attack. She took photos, scribbled notes, and even stopped passing cars to point out my violations, as if expecting them to be equally outraged. Spoiler, they were not. Then came her grand act of desperation. Late one evening, I heard rustling outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen, wearing what could only be described as neighborhood patrol camo. An oversized cardigan and what I assumed were her husband's sneakers. She was on my property, measuring my lawn. I watched in disbelief as she squatted down, ruler in hand, inspecting every blade of grass like a forensic scientist at a crime scene. And then, because Karen cannot Karen without going full Karen, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. The next morning, the entire neighborhood had received an email titled Urgent, Community Standards at Risk. Attached were 18 photos of my front yard, complete with dramatic captions like non-regulation flamingo placement and potential grass height violation. Unconfirmed but concerning. The email ended with a threat to take official legal action. That was it. I had been patient. I had been reasonable. But this was war. And if Karen wanted to play games, I was about to win. So I started gathering evidence. First, I compiled every ridiculous violation notice she had ever sent me. The trash can complaint? Check. The mailbox visual disruption nonsense? Check. The single leaf offense? Oh, you bet I still had that one. Next, I started talking to neighbors. Turns out, Karen had been violating her own precious HOA rules. Her Christmas lights? Non-regulation color scheme. Her backyard? A disaster. Overgrown bushes, faded patio furniture, even an unapproved wind chime. Her car? Parked in her driveway at the wrong angle. And the best part? Karen had been using HOA funds to pay for personal home repairs. Once I had enough evidence, I did what any sane homeowner would do. I printed everything out, stapled it together in a very official-looking binder, and brought it straight to the next HOA meeting. When I walked in, Karen was already there, standing at the podium, mid-rant about how I was corrupting the neighborhood. I let her finish. Then, I calmly placed my binder on the table and slid it over to the HOA board. Actually, I said, I'd like to discuss Karen's repeated violations. The room went silent. Karen paled. What? I flipped to the first page and started reading. The more I talked, the more people nodded along. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up before were suddenly very interested in what I had to say. By the time I finished, the HOA president was rubbing his temples like a man who regretted every decision that had led him to this moment. Then he turned to Karen. Karen, is this true? She stammered. I was just ensuring compliance. I was protecting property values. The president sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and finally said the words we had all been waiting for. You're removed from your position, effective immediately. And just like that, Karen was dethroned. Karen was stunned. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No counterarguments, no fake regulations, no passive-aggressive emails to fall back on. She just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish, waiting for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. No one did. Instead, the HOA board began murmuring amongst themselves. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out before suddenly found their voices. You know, Tom mused. Karen fined me $50 for having my garden hose coiled the wrong way. Lisa crossed her arms. She made me repaint my fence because it was too bright, even though it was an HOA-approved color. Raj nodded. She tried to charge me a fine for parking my own car in my own driveway. The HOA president sighed and rubbed his temples. This is not how we run a community. Karen's face turned bright red. You need me. Without rules, this neighborhood will turn into chaos. People will start putting pink flamingos in their yards. I grinned. Like these. I gestured toward the photo evidence of my perfectly HOA-approved flamingos, the same ones that had been the final straw in Karen's unraveling. The president shot Karen a look. Karen, flamingos are allowed. She looked like she was about to explode. But, the HOA board held a quick vote, and within minutes, it was official. Karen was out. Removed from her self-appointed position of power, stripped of her clipboard, and most importantly, banned from issuing any further complaints. For the first time in years, the neighborhood exhaled. That night, something magical happened. Tom put up a giant inflatable flamingo in his yard. Lisa strung colorful lights across her porch. Non-regulation colors, of course. Raj set up a perfectly legal but obnoxiously oversized lawn gnome, right in full view of Karen's house. And as for me, I threw a block party. It started small, a few neighbors coming over to celebrate the end of Karen's reign. But soon more people joined in. Someone brought a speaker. Someone else set up a grill. Before long, the whole street was alive with laughter, music, and, for the first time in ages, joy. Karen, of course, refused to participate. She stayed inside, peeking out from behind her blinds, probably drafting an angry letter to the Real HOA board demanding that fun be outlawed. But it didn't matter. She had no power anymore. By the end of the night, we were all gathered on my front lawn, drinks in hand, watching as a few brave souls snuck over to Karen's yard and placed one final decoration in the middle of her perfectly manicured lawn. A single, bright pink flamingo. The next morning, it was gone. So was Karen. The neighborhood felt different after that night. Lighter. Freer. Like a dark cloud had finally lifted, and we could all breathe again without the fear of a surprise citation for existing the wrong way. Karen didn't leave immediately, but something about her had changed. The once proud enforcer of all things HOA had lost her power, and without it, she was just a regular homeowner. One who suddenly had to live by the same rules she had spent years weaponizing against the rest of us. She tried at first to keep up appearances. She'd still do her morning patrols, peering out from behind her curtains, looking for violations. But now, when she saw a garden gnome or a slightly overgrown lawn, there was nothing she could do about it. No letters, no threats, no calls to the HOA board. She was powerless. And the best part, no one was afraid of her anymore. Instead of avoiding her wrath, people started going out of their way to be extra nice. "Good morning, Karen," Tom would call out, waving enthusiastically whenever she walked outside. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Lisa would chime in, making sure to stand right next to her oversized pink flamingo whenever Karen glanced her way. And me? Well, I made sure to mow my lawn every exact 2.5 weeks. Just enough time to make Karen think she had something to complain about, but never actually breaking any rules. Over time, she started retreating. The clipboard disappeared. The aggressive emails stopped. The violations dried up. And then one day, she was gone. A moving truck pulled up early one morning, and by sunset, Karen's house was empty. No grand farewell, no dramatic exit, just a silent, almost embarrassed departure. Her replacement? A lovely retired couple who immediately invited the whole block over for drinks and barbecue. That night, as we all sat around laughing, someone asked, "Do you think she'll try to pull the same HOA stunt in her new neighborhood?" We all thought about it for a second. Then Raj grinned. "Nah, I bet she's somewhere right now, sitting in her new driveway, realizing she's surrounded by even bigger Karens." We all raised our glasses in silent tribute to the idea. And as I looked around at my gnome-filled, flamingo-decorated, happily unregulated neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. Karen was gone. And for the first time in years, we were finally free. Do you think Karen actually believed she was helping? Or was she just on a power trip? Speech balloon on a scale of 1 till she measured my lawn with a ruler. How much of a control freak was Karen? Speech balloon if Karen had called 911 on you. What ridiculous reason do you think she would have used? If you enjoyed watching Karen's downfall as much as we did, don't forget to hit that like button. It's scientifically proven asterisk not really, that every like makes a Karen lose her clipboard. Speech balloon got your own HOA horror story? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. And who knows, your story might even make it into a future video. Backhand index pointing right, and if you love HOA chaos, entitled people drama, and a little bit of petty revenge, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because trust me, this won't be the last time an HOA Karen loses her mind. Thanks for watching. Now go mow your lawn or don't. Just to spite Karen.